Thank you to our jazz ensemble. After my remarks, I'm going to turn the podium over to Savannah Jane Griffin, who's the chair of Values Day. But I want to give her and the whole committee my special thanks. They worked so hard on this, but this was a labor of love. From what I understand, this committee made up of faculty, staff, community people, students really had a great time putting on what will be a great day for you. So thank you, Savannah Jane. Thank you. So why are we here this morning? Well, some of you may be for the cultural credits. I hope that's the minority of you. But we're also here at Stetson for a reason. And we're here because this is an institution that cares deeply about her values. And somewhere along the line, when we were choosing a place to go to school or to teach at or to work at, we said to ourselves that a place that has values and believe in them is a place that we as individuals want to be. We're here in the room because it's Values Day, and I have to tell you, this is my 10th Values Day. I have never seen the room this full before, and I am so pumped that you are all here, so thank you for that. I heard that. Woo. We're also here because we believe that there are many voices in our one Stetson, and that's a reason to gather together and assure that all of our voices are heard because it makes us stronger. I want to give some credit to my predecessor, Dr. Lee, who in his visionary way saw how important values would be in our institution and to ingrain them in the Stetson experience and in who we are. And I also want to give credit to Professor Emily Mires and one of our VPs who's moved on elsewhere named Chris Candace Fisher. They were really the architects of the current heart of values, as we call them, and they spent a year thinking through that with members of the university community all across our four locations in Florida and came up with what you know as the values of our institution. And I also wanted to just say to you that sometimes conversation feels like it's not action, like we're not accomplishing anything. But this morning at the World Cafe, conversation was powerful. And for those of you who were there were stories being told that went to the hearts of the people who were telling them. Reflections on how Stetson can be a more inclusive environment and what Stetson is doing well. And that also included looking at a draft of our equity and inclusion statement. I want to personally thank the folks who were there today. I was up there for probably an hour of the time, and I learned a lot, and I thought that our report out from the groups was particularly useful. We have a group here called the IISG, and our provost tends to call it the because it's unpronounceable and unknowing. And so one of the tasks at the World Cafe this morning was to think about what else could we call it. And the groups came up with all kinds of acronyms that some of them were really easy to pronounce and some of them weren't, and some of them weren't even acronyms at all. But they got to the flavor of what our Inclusive Excellence group is trying to do. And that's led by Drew McCann, and I would just like to give you the names of the other people on it, because they've been working for the last year plus on strategies to make inclusive excellence a reality at Stetson. Our new members just joining the group this year are Belém Lopez, Angela Osmar, Lauren Spratt, Jeff Taylor, Joanne Harris-Duff, and Chris Noblet. And our returning members are Elizabeth Potter, Sean-Reese Campbell, Jason Myrie, Maria Francis, Savannah Jane Griffin, and Julie Metzger. And we really appreciate the work you do. Sometimes you feel like you get a tremendous boost and something works right. And some days you just keep working and hoping that you can help bring this campus together and have everyone's voices heard in a civil and respectful and honoring way. So thank you all for being here today. This really warms my heart to see so many of you here. And I'm going to introduce Savannah Jane Griffin, and then she will introduce our speaker, and we'll get on with our program. Have a great Values Day. Participate widely and deeply. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. All right, welcome to the opening session of Stetson University's Values Day. I wanted to thank the Stetson University Jazz Ensemble for that incredible performance, and Dr. Tim Peter for coordinating it. Values are central to our work as an institution. Every member of our community, including our students, faculty, staff, and alumni, either chose to be here or chooses to stay here because I'm sure some part of our values strikes a chord in their minds and hearts. I'm Savannah Jane Griffin, and in addition to serving as the Executive Director of Community Engagement and Inclusive Excellence, I also serve as the Chair for our Values Day Planning Committee. At this time, I would like to ask any members of the Planning Committee to stand to be recognized for all of the work you've done. I see a few of you in the back. Stand. Come on. Anybody else in here stand? There's some up top as well. You can find the list of our planning committee on the back of the program as well, or the last page of the program, as well as on our website. So I highly encourage you to take a look and see who's been involved in this. If you're interested in helping plan next year's Values Day, please contact me. We are looking for more members. Values Day itself began in 2014, making this the program's 5th year. Its spiritual predecessor, Diversity Day, was a long-standing tradition of the university that similarly canceled classes in exchange for a series of workshops and town hall-style discourse focusing explicitly on issues of diversity and inclusion at the university. We honor the commitment made by our late former president, Dr. H. Douglas Lee, in focusing our community's attention on our values. And we similarly appreciate the commitment that our current president, Dr. Wendy Libby, in sustaining this dialogue and challenging us to move from dialogue to action. Let's talk a little bit more about dialogue and action. Dialogue is necessary because it ensures that we've included all voices and perspectives. Dialogue is necessary because it ensures that we've explored a topic and learned as much as we can about it. Dialogue represents the half of our university's mission that focuses on knowledge and learning, our academic mission. Action, meanwhile, is necessary because it ensures that we've done something with that knowledge we've gained. Action is necessary because it ensures that we've actually taken ownership over challenges that exist in our community and worked to address them. Action represents the half of our university's mission that focuses on engagement and justice. It's our civic mission. Dialogue without action may be exciting for those who are knee-deep in its scholarship and research, but it is ultimately devoid of purpose. We know what we are learning, but may not have a good answer for why we are learning it. Action without dialogue may be energizing for those who want to solve the most pressing challenges facing our world, but they will likely find themselves to be ineffective without knowledge of theory and best practices in their field of study. We need both dialogue and action. Both are academic and civic missions. That is the true purpose of Values Day, to equip us all with both the knowledge and opportunity we need to be effective and engaged citizens of local communities in the world. To that end, I challenge you to use this day to find more ways that you can live out your values, to find more ways that you can connect your academic interests and career goals with the needs that exist in our community. We have many activities and workshops planned to help you do just that. So you can find the program on Guidebook. You can download the Guidebook app and look for Values Day, and you can access our whole program there. You could also find it on our website, or if you have a hard copy of the program, which we purposefully did not print a whole lot of copies of because we were trying to be environmentally friendly, you will find the list of events for the rest of this day. I do want to highlight some of these events so you all are aware of what's going on. Immediately after the keynote, when you exit Elizabeth Hall, in front of the Carlton Union Building will be the Global Citizenship Fair. We have a number of nonprofit organizations and study abroad partners that will be present. They're looking for volunteers, interns. If you're interested in studying abroad, this is the time to explore the different opportunities that are out there. There's also, at the same time, from 12 to 2, a free lunch in the Commons. So use this opportunity to go and eat lunch with your friends, meet new people, and enjoy the amazing new Commons cafeteria. There's also a Stetson Read from 12:30 to 1:30, and this was an RSVP event where people will be able to get to ask more questions of our keynote speaker, Eric Weiner. And then there's also the Hand Art Center from 11 to 4. They have their exhibit that will be up, the Immigration Project, and it's incredible. The artist is actually here today and will be facilitating a workshop in Workshop Block 1, so check out the workshops if you're interested in that. But it is an exhibit you won't want to miss. Then we have 2 workshop blocks, one from 2 to 3:15 and one from 3:30 to 5. A number of your colleagues, friends, community members will be presenting on a variety of different topics, so check out that schedule. I know it's going to be hard for me to choose one to go to because they all look so great. And then we're culminating the evening with the viewing of Black Panther, which is being sponsored by the Multicultural Student Council. So I highly encourage you to come up to the new Stetson room, and there will be popcorn and some other treats as we watch the film. There are also 2 other opportunities that I want to highlight. First, today is not only Values Day, it is also National Voter Registration Day. This is an election year, and thanks to our partnership with TurboVote, it is easy to register to vote, sign up to vote by mail, or update your address or voting information. Just go to stetson.turbovote.org. I'll say that one more time in case you want to put it in your phone. stetson.turbovote.org. It will take about 3 minutes, and it will help you get registered before the deadline in early October. If you are not registered to vote, you will not be able to participate in voting in the election. So this is one of our civic responsibilities, and I highly encourage you to get registered. Second, there's a new program called Flunch, which is a fun way of abbreviating faculty lunch. Flunch is a free lunch program to encourage big talk between faculty and students. Students just ask a faculty member to lunch, and the cost will be covered thanks to donations from alumnus and former faculty member Jay Melching, as well as Stetson Dining, Campus Life and Student Success, and SGA. There will be an announcement that goes out later on this week about this program, but if you're interested in taking a faculty member to lunch, this is a great opportunity. So I wanted to thank you all for your participation today as we lean into the conversation and action centered on our values. At this time, we will transition into the keynote address. Our speaker, Eric Weiner, will be addressing our community, and we will allow for 10 to 15 minutes of questions and answers at the end of his address. We ask that the audience remain seated during the Q&A. Students will be able to receive cultural credit immediately following this event outside of Elizabeth Hall. So you can exit the building and there'll be 3 people with scanners that you can scan for cultural credit. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker. Our speaker, Eric Weiner, is a veteran foreign correspondent who's worked on several award-winning teams for National Public Radio and has been a business reporter for the New York Times. He's been posted in New Delhi, Jerusalem, and Tokyo, as well as Washington, D.C. He is currently a regular commentator for NPR. Eric is the author of The Geography of Bliss, One Grump's Search for the Happiest Places in the World, a memoir of his travels to countries that are known for their happy people. A New York Times bestseller, it has been translated into 14 languages. Eric's most recent book, a New York Times bestseller as well, The Geography of Genius, seeks to answer the question of how creative genius flourishes in specific places at specific times. In it, he explores the history of places from ancient Athens to Renaissance Florence to modern-day Silicon Valley. He is also the author of Man Seeks God, My Flirtations with the Divine, a serious, funny book based on his travels of the world in search for an experience of the divine. Eric is the winner of the Angel Award and a co-recipient of the Peabody Award. His commentaries has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Slate, and the New Republic. We are very honored to have him here with us today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome for Eric Weiner.
Wow. Thank you. Good morning, DeLand. Thank you, Savannah Jane, for that gracious introduction. Thank you, Dr. Libby, and thank you to the band. I've never had a band before. I think I will travel with one from now on, just a traveling band. I'm really happy to be in DeLand, and I should start off by saying I'm not a stranger to Stetson or to DeLand. Some of you may know my father, Dr. Cy Weiner, who I'm told has been a formidable presence on campus for many years now. So this is a happy coincidence that I'm here today, or maybe it is fate. Who knows? I want to begin with a question. Simple question, sort of. Where are you? Now you're probably wondering, this is an obvious question, this is a silly question. I am sitting here in Lee Chapel in DeLand, Florida, listening to this idiot ask me where the heck I am. And you may also be thinking, it's kind of an outdated question, right? Because geography is so 20th century, right? Doesn't matter where we are. We've got these devices, and some of you are probably clutching them in your paws right now that can make us anywhere, right? We can FaceTime or Snapchat with people halfway around the world. It doesn't matter where I am, might be your answer to that question. That's wrong. Geography is not dead, not by a long shot. Despite all these virtual connections, travel is up. Something about these digital connections make us want to have real connections. And have you noticed that all these people who tell us that this technology is going to mean the death of place and the death of geography, they tend to live in one place, a 60-mile stretch between San Francisco and San Jose, California, otherwise known as Silicon Valley. Still the center of innovation, still where most venture capital flows through. And if you're still not convinced, I will point out a study done in Finland where they would go around and eavesdrop on people's cell phone conversations, which is remarkably easy to do. You just need to be in public anytime, any place, and you too can eavesdrop on people's cell phone conversations, and they listen to the questions that the person on the phone was asking the other invisible interlocutor. And you know what the number one question was? Well, it was, can you hear me now? But the number two question, very close, was, where are you? You see, place matters. Where we are is vital to who we are. I firmly believe that. But what do I mean by place? Well, on the one hand, I mean topography, the lay of the land. We humans like certain kind of land more than others. Although, by the way, it changes sometimes. Did you know that up until the 17th, 18th century, mountains were considered barbaric and nobody would ever go to them? But one consistent thing we seem to like is water. We love a water view. We will pay extra for a water view, a lot extra. And I'm not sure why. In fact, I was vacationing on the Oregon coast, and whenever I vacation somewhere, I always look at the real estate ads to see if I can afford anything, because I'm always picturing myself living there. And I noticed there was this bungalow advertised, and it advertised a former ocean view. So it doesn't have it anymore, but at some point it once had an ocean view, therefore you should pay extra for it. So yes, place is topography, but really, when I talk about place, I'm talking about culture. And culture is hugely important, and I believe highly underrated and underappreciated. We're like the fish, a goldfish in a fishbowl. The goldfish doesn't know it's in a fishbowl, that it's even in this thing called water, until you remove it from the fishbowl and it can see it and it can't breathe, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the fish tank that I was in. See, culture is the sea that we swim in, but it's largely invisible. And the thing is, different fish bowls do different things well. Different cultures do different things well. Some are better at producing wealth. Some are better at producing beauty. Think of Renaissance Florence or Japan today or other cultures like that. And some cultures are better at producing happiness. If you've ever taken a vacation somewhere or found yourself somewhere and said to yourself, I could be happy here, you know what I'm talking about. So we're going to take a whirlwind tour of some of the happiest and at least one of the least happy countries of the world. And no passports or vaccinations required, that's the good part. But if we're going to be traveling companions, I feel you need to know more about me. There are really only two things you need to know about me. Number one, I love to travel, and number two, I'm a grump. Now, you're probably thinking, is this guy really a grump? I mean, we heard about these awards he won, and he's written these books that have done fairly well. Kind of a good-looking guy, too. You know, what's up? The truth is, and I'm being perfectly honest here, is that I'm more of a malcontent than a grump. But my publisher thought malcontent had too many syllables and sounded suspiciously French, so we went with grump. True story. And to be even more true, I have suffered from a kind of low-grade melancholia and even mild depression throughout much of my life. And it hasn't hugely interfered with what I do, but it's always there in the background. Now, I'm told that vinyl records are making a comeback, correct? So if you listen to them on a turntable, there are these things called flutter and harmonic distortion that sort of distort the fidelity of the recording. You can't hear harmonic distortion per se, but it's there degrading the fidelity of the recording, and that's sort of what my unhappiness is like. It's always there in the background, whether I'm aware of it or not. I suffer from what the historian Darren McMahon calls the unhappiness of not being happy. The unhappiness of not being happy, which is a very modern American malady, right? Because for most of history, happiness was this thing that only the gods aspired to, or a special few. It wasn't for us, mere mortals. But now, today, especially in this country, everyone can be happy, and then everyone should be happy, and if you're not, what the heck is wrong with you? So, the second part, as I said, I love to travel. And this case of wanderlust manifested at a very early age. When I was 5 years old, true story, I ran away from home and made it quite far, a couple miles, and would have made it to my destination, wherever that may have been, I don't know, had the Baltimore County Police not put a sudden, and I thought premature end to my adventure. I've been on the move ever since, and I truly believe that happiness lies just around the corner, but the trick is knowing which corner. That's key. My approach to travel is that it can be transformative. As Henry Miller said, One's destination is never a place, but a new way of looking at things. And that, I think, is the real power of travel and experiencing the world, this new way of looking at things. Now, if you're happier somewhere, you go travel on a vacation or you go to visit friends, what is it about the place that makes you feel better? Is it the energy vortices? Maybe. I'm agnostic about that. But really, I think it's that when we're in different places, we give ourselves permission to be different people. And that's hugely important. So, okay, I graduate from college. I was about your age. I had a grumpy disposition, malcontent, no marketable skills, fierce sense of wanderlust, and a somewhat dubious sense of right and wrong. So naturally, I became a journalist. Sort of kidding, sort of not. It was a way for me to see the world, but to experience the world in that way that Henry Miller meant, to see things differently. And I had a blessed career as a foreign correspondent, mainly for NPR, a decade overseas, and it was very satisfying on one level, but I have to say, it could also be kind of a bummer. Here I was writing about what I know. What do I know? I know unhappiness. It's part of who I am. And what was I doing as a journalist? All journalists do this. We focus on the negative. It's the nature of the business. And if you're a foreign correspondent, I say this with only slight exaggeration, you wake up every morning in New Delhi or Tokyo or wherever, and you say, okay, where's the least happy place I can go in my turf? And then when you get there, be it Afghanistan, Iraq, Indonesia, I've been to all these places, you look around and say, okay, I'm in a really unhappy place. Let me find the least happy people, refugees, victims of disease, famine, and then you spend lots of time with them. And you wonder why journalists are such negative people. So I woke up one morning and I had one of these light bulb moments, an epiphany. I thought, what if, instead of traveling around the world reporting on the misery and the unhappiness, what if I spent a year traveling around the world looking for the happiest places and the happiest people? And then I had a second light bulb moment, even brighter. And that was this. What if I spent a year traveling around the world and got NPR to pay for me to do this, looking for happy people and places? And no, the foreign desk says, that's not what we do. Thank you very much. Fortunately, I found a publisher that was willing to help support my my project, and I was off and running with the Geography of Bliss. But where to start? The journalist in me told me I needed this thing that begins with the letter F that used to be a part of our discourse. Facts. I needed facts, yes. And where was I going to find them? On Google, right. Google search, happiness, places. Something pops up that catches my attention. The World Database of Happiness. This blew me away. I have never associated data and happiness and seen them so close together, you know? Data is something that I lose or that overwhelms me. It's not happy, right? So it's a real place. It's in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. And it's run by a kindly Dutch professor named Ruud Veenhoven, who reminds me of sort of a Dutch Robin Williams. He's got that same sort of mischievous sparkle in his eyes. And essentially, the World Database of Happiness is the embodiment of the science of happiness. Have you heard of that? The science of happiness is all the rage. As they say, happy is the new sad when it comes to psychology. This was essentially psychologists realizing that, like me, they've been focusing on negativity too much, and they need to do something about that. So they started studying happy people and what makes them happy. And they run, of course, first into the problem that any scientist faces, which is, how can you have a science if you can't measure, right? You've got to measure something, but how do you measure happiness? Happiness is a smiley face, a warm feeling, a puppy. It's all these things that you can't measure. But aha, you can measure happiness. And I could measure the happiness of anyone in this room right now. And it's very simple. I will ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? Overall, how happy are you? Not at this moment, but overall in your life. And that's basically it, with a few variations, what the psychologists have been doing for a few decades now, asking people this question. Why? Because happiness is subjective. I can't tell you how happy you are. That's for you to decide. And that's why they call happiness, with the fancy term, subjective well-being, SWB. So when they ask these questions, they find certain correlations. And I will share some of them with you now. Who's happy and who's not? Extroverts are happier than introverts. Optimists are happier than pessimists. Married people are happier than singles, though people with children are no happier than childless couples. Republicans are happier than Democrats. People who attend religious services are happier than those who do not. People with college degrees are happier than those without, though people with advanced degrees are less happy than those with just a BA. Keep that in mind. People with an active sex life are happier than those without. They had to study that. Women and men are equally happy, though women have a wider emotional range. Having an affair will make you happy, but will not compensate for the massive loss of happiness that you will incur when your spouse finds out and leaves you. People are least happy when they're commuting to work, not from. Busy people are happier than those with too little to do. Wealthy people are happier than poor ones, but only slightly. So there you go. Of course, it gets tricky because those are correlations, not cause and effect. You know, are married people really happier than single people, or just people who are happier more likely to get married because who wants to marry a grump? So it's tricky untangling it, and it gets even trickier when you get to my question, which is not what is happiness or who's happy, but where is happiness? Now you're comparing across countries. And every culture has a word for happiness, whether it's the French bonheur, or our happiness, or there's always a word, but with a slightly different nuance and a slightly different meaning. But these results are remarkably consistent over decades, in fact, when they go around the world and they ask the question. So if you could picture a map of the world, it turns out that happiness is a lot like oil. Expensive? No. It's actually distributed unevenly. Some places, countries are awash in it, and others are bone dry. So very quickly, basically, the least happy countries in the world are two types. Sub-Saharan Africa, where I think it's pretty obvious their basic needs are not being met, and the former Soviet Union. If you're Russian or you've been colonized by Russia, you're not happy. Latin American countries. Any Latinos here today? Okay, well, you may be experiencing the Latino bonus at this very moment, which is that Latin American countries are happier than they quote-unquote should be based on socioeconomics, really. And they attribute that, theorize, that it's family, that they're close-knit families, and we'll get to that in a minute. East Asian countries, Japan, China, Korea, South Korea, not as happy as you'd think. And researchers call this the East Asian happiness gap, which sounds like something you could just fall into and never be heard from again. And the happiest places, I am sad to report, are not tropical places where you can lie on a beach and sun yourself, but they're cold, dark places like Denmark and Iceland. And this comes both as a surprise and a disappointment to me, because I was hoping to lie on a beach and sun myself doing research. And we'll get to in a minute why that might be the case. But I want to talk a little bit about my approach to the world before we set off on this journey. Because I am really a recovering journalist. I've really transitioned into a new way of being in the world and writing about the world. I look at the world as a laboratory of ideas, of good ideas. And too often, if you turn on the news or you log onto your phone, you're seeing the world as a litany of disasters and just terribleness. And that's not the case. Every day, right now, throughout the world, there are acts of kindness and acts of love and acts of genius that are being committed that you don't hear about. And I really wanted to change that. I use my skills as a journalist talking to people. I no longer use the word interview. I don't interview people. I talk to them. I have conversations with them. And I have a point of view. I am not objective. I don't think any journalism is objective. No one's objective. You can be fair, but that's slightly different. And if you've read any of my books, you know that I try to use humor as a way to shed light on the truth. Humor can be used to hide the truth. It can also be used to shed light on the truth. I also have skin in the game. I mean, I'm not removed from this process. I'm an unhappy person trying to be happier. I'm being a little selfish here. I'm hoping the search produces a happier Eric. And I'm not an expert, and I don't try to be one. I will translate the experts into readable English, but I try not to suffer from expertitis. which means that you are closed off to the openness of experience because you think you know it all. I would rather be a see-it-all than a know-it-all. And my philosophy of writing is that of Henry David Thoreau, who said, simplify, simplify, simplify. And every time I read that, I want to cross out 2 of the simplifies because it just seems excessive. As Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. So we're off around the world. Here we go. First stop, Switzerland. Really? Switzerland? One of the happiest countries in the world? I mean, it's kind of boring, right? That was my impression of Switzerland. Highly functional, but boring. No sense of humor. So there I am sitting in Geneva with a psychiatrist, actually, named Dieter, and I'm being very diplomatic because I don't want to offend them, but I'm like, Dieter, is it true? It seems the Swiss don't really have a sense of humor. And he shoots back at me, define sense of humor. I thought that kind of proved the point, you know, if you have to say that. I said, but things are so orderly here. He's like, no, we have anarchy. It's in the afternoons, usually at 2, sometimes at 3. So how can Switzerland be so happy? Happier than France and Italy and the joie de vivre and the dolce vita and all those other foreign phrases. Well, it turns out a few things. One is trust. Trust is hugely important, and the Swiss trust each other. You can go up into these Alps in the mountain huts, and they will have a little food and a little bin to put the money in for the food. Like, would that work in the US, or would people take the money and the food and walk out? There's a huge amount of trust, and I have yet to go to a happy place where there was not a lot of trust, or an unhappy one where there was trust. So let me ask you one question, and it's simply true or false. Overall, most people can be trusted. Raise your hand. Now, it's purposely worded vaguely, without specificity. But just overall, most people can be trusted. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Okay. And overall, most people cannot be trusted. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Okay. And if you're unsure about whether to trust me with my question, raise your hand. Okay. Those numbers have slid in the US. In the 1960s, some 68% of the people said, yes, overall, most people can be trusted. When they repeated that 40 years later, it was something like 35%. Does not bode well for us. The Swiss also have nature going for them. There's this notion of biophilia, which you may have heard of, coined by the naturalist E.O. Wilson. Fancy word that means basically nature makes us feel good. The Swiss have this real connection to the land. On their passport, it always has their ancestral hometown. Not where they were born, but their ancestral hometown. There's that connection to the land. And the word for the notion of homesickness was invented by the Swiss, along with the word for it. So they have that connection to the land, and things really do work well. So their idea of happiness is what the philosopher Schopenhauer called an absence of misery, which is important on some level. There's a lot to be said for contentment, as opposed to the more mercurial up and down that you see in, say, the Mediterranean European countries. And since Switzerland's a wealthy country, I just want to briefly talk about the connection, because you're probably wondering, so what's the deal? Does money buy happiness? And I'm here to tell you definitively that the answer is yes and no. It's complex. Not complicated, but complex. First of all, the myth of the poor, happy person is just that, a myth. Like, oh, look, they have nothing in Tanzania, but they seem so happy. Well, they're not happy. Statistically, they rank toward the very bottom. But something happens. When a country like Tanzania gets wealthier and wealthier, just a little bit wealthier, the happiness shoots up. But then at a certain point, and not very much, in fact, it plateaus. Beyond that point, takes a lot more wealth to move the needle at all. In fact, in the case of Switzerland or wealthy countries like the US, at this point we have enough. Really, we do. More than enough. What matters now is not the amount of money we have, but what we do with it. Do we spend it on stuff or experiences? If you spend it on experiences, research shows you're going to be happier. Do you spend it on yourself or spend it on others? There's a big happiness boost from spending money on others. So afterwards, just give someone money, see how that feels. Let's move on. Airplane flight, we're in Iceland, and it's January, and we're wondering what we're doing here because it's dark, like pitch dark at noon, right? And you ask the hotel clerk when the sun will be coming up, and he looks at you like you're nuts, like, sun? I don't know, like March? I'm like, okay. So what are you guys doing in the top 3 happiest countries in the world? I mean, you're cold and dark. They're pretty upfront about it, Iceland, land of ice. They're not trying to hide it like those Greenlanders. A few observations about Iceland. Number one is there's a fluidity to life there. You're not stuck in a box. I meet this man named Lars, who's in his 40s and has had like 4 different careers: construction company executive, journalist, chess player, and now he's a music executive. And it's perfectly normal there. It's perfectly normal. Failure doesn't mar you for life. You can reinvent yourself, and I think that's a big contributor to happiness. Also, do you know how many people there are in Iceland? Anyone? 320,000. Okay, that's not a lot. And they're all literally related to one another if you go back 7 generations. It's one big family. Everyone's connected, and people don't have to worry about falling into a black hole because there's no black hole to fall into, right? So after I left Iceland, the country collapsed. I should warn you, this tends to happen to places I visit. There was an economic collapse, and I was like, oh no, now they're not going to be happy. What am I going to do? So I email a friend that I have there, a man named Carl Blondell, who's a journalist there. I'm like, Carl, what's going on? You guys, your economy's collapsed, your banks have collapsed. I assume you guys are no longer happy now, right? This is what he writes back to me, and I'll share a bit of it. A lot of people have been hit really hard. Pensioners have lost their savings. But there's also a lot of communal feeling. People address each other in a more caring way in the morning. Neighbors inquire how each other is doing. One thing about living in a small community is that everyone you know, family and friends, is within reach. Those who lost their jobs are not isolated. The risk of estrangement is not as it would be in bigger societies. So in fact, they survived and weathered that crisis, and they dropped maybe 1 or 2 points, and that was it. It's also, and I'll get back to this later in my talk, it's a very creative place. Musicians, authors, there's an Icelandic expression, better to go barefoot than without a book. In Iceland, not in Florida. Very creative place. So let's get on our airplane now, and now we're flying clear over Europe into Asia, and we're in Bhutan. Have people heard of Bhutan? Have people been to Bhutan? Okay, Bhutan is a Himalayan kingdom sandwiched between India and China. Was isolated completely until the 1960s and 70s from the rest of the world, and it's a fascinating place. It's probably the closest thing you find to a real Shangri-La on the planet today. And a number of years ago, the king of Bhutan, I suspect, read this quote from Robert F. Kennedy. So RFK said this about gross domestic product, or gross national product. GNP does not measure the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriage, or the intelligence of our public debate. GNP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. And the king decided to change that and to come up with a policy of GNH, gross national happiness. And it's an experiment that's going on for a number of years now, and it's fascinating. He's basically said, what is the point of all this wealth and increasing our GDP if it's not making us any happier? The US is 5 times wealthier on a GDP basis than it was in the 1950s, but no happier. So what are we doing? We're measuring the wrong thing. So in Bhutan now, with mixed results, they attempt to make every decision through the prism of not only will it bring more wealth to our country, but will it make people happier? And now other countries, the UK, France, not so much in this country, surprisingly, are following suit in trying to measure these things as well. What made my travels memorable to me, and hopefully to you, the reader, is not the policy stuff. There's some of that about gross national happiness, which is fascinating. It's the people I meet. Don't interview them, I meet them, I talk to them, I become friends with them, some of them, the ones I like. And I met a man in Bhutan named Karma Ora. Now let me tell you something. When you meet a man named Karma, you've done something right in a previous lifetime. I just like to think that. And he's this fascinating man who grew up in a small village, went on to earn a Ph.D. from Cambridge University in the UK, and I just felt like he had some wisdom. And I asked him questions. I said, Karma, like how did you go so far? What's your secret to what seems to be this enviable contentment? He said, well, first of all, I have low expectations. I'm like, huh? Well, you have a PhD and you, he said, yeah, but I don't expect it. It's not an expectation. And in fact, expectations get in the way of happiness. And maybe you've experienced this yourself. When you're expecting something, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and your effort is then poisoned in a way. The ancient Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, essentially suggests that we do this, and I'm paraphrasing, put 100% effort into what you're doing and have 0% invested in the result, which is really hard to do. If you're studying, if you're writing a book, if you're playing music, you want to get those results. But no, put in the effort, have zero expectations. That's Karma's approach. The other thing he said to me, he said, Eric, I don't understand you Americans when you talk about your personal happiness. You're working on your personal happiness. He said, happiness isn't personal. Happiness is 100% relational. I thought, 100% seemed high. I thought it seemed high, I thought, well, maybe 50%. He said, no, 100%. The more I traveled, the more I researched this, the more I found out that Karma was exactly right. That happiness, it's not a noun or a verb, it's a conjunction, it's a connector. Our happiness depends on the quantity to some extent, but the quality of our relationships with everyone, with professors, with friends, with the barista at Starbucks who you interact with. It's a different way of looking at happiness. And the last thing he said to me, because I confessed to him that I was having some anxiety and even, frankly, some panic attacks at the time, and I couldn't figure out why. And he looked at me and said, Eric, here's your problem. It's the problem that everyone in the West has. You don't think about death often enough. I'm like, no, really? I don't, is that it? And he's like, yes, you should think about death for 10 minutes every day. And he said, and that will cure you of your anxiety. So I promised him like 3 or 4 minutes. I could give him 3 or 4 minutes a day. And I try to do that because having a sense of your own mortality, and having a sense of it, I mean acknowledging it, does a lot to squelch that background of anxiety that we feel in our lives. So moving on to Thailand, land of smiles, that's the cliche, but a pretty darn happy place too, and why? Well, there's an expression in Thailand, Mai Pen Rai, which translates roughly as never mind, just never mind. It's wonderful. They also have an expression that means don't think too much, or you think too much. In Thailand, and this is true, people consider excessive thinking a sign of mental illness, which would make most college campuses pretty much insane asylums, And there's an interesting study that sort of backs up this idea. Psychologists took 3 groups of people and had them all listen to the same piece of music, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, beautiful piece of classical music. And they were given different instructions, though. Group 1 was told, listen to the music and try really hard to be happy when you're listening to it. And group 2 was told, listen to the music and monitor your happiness level throughout. And the third group was told, just listen to the music. And afterwards, they did measurements of changes in subjective well-being, happiness, and it was that third group that was told to just listen to the music that was the happiest. They weren't thinking too much. They were experiencing. So what have I learned from all these travels? And those were just a few of them. You want to cut to the chase. You're busy students, right? You're like Okay, what do I need to be happy? I don't have time to read the whole book. It's too long. I've got other classes. Here it is, okay? Happiness. Money matters, but less than we think and not in the way that we think. Family is important, so are friends. Envy is toxic, so is excessive thinking. Beaches are optional. Trust is not. Neither is gratitude. The thing about happiness is it's slippery. You can't just try to grab it. The more you try to grab it, the more it slips out of your grasp. John Stuart Mill, the British philosopher, said happiness should be approached sideways, like a crab. It is a byproduct of a life lived well. And normally, this is where I would end. Though this is how the lessons I learned from happiness, this is what you can learn. But we're calling my talk Happiness and Beyond, and that raises a question. Is happiness enough? Is that all we want? A thought experiment. Everyone close your eyes. Don't worry, it won't be like a weird California thing. Just close your eyes. So picture you're hooked up to this experience machine. It's perfectly safe, FDA approved, but safe anyway. No joke, okay. And you're lying down, you're very comfortable, and it's flooding you with happiness. Pure happiness. And here's the bargain. Would you like to spend the rest of your life lying down, hooked up to this machine, experiencing happiness? Raise your hand if you'd like to be hooked up to the machine. A few undergrads in the back. Raise your hand if you would not like to be hooked up to the machine. That is what most people answer. And it's baffling because we say we want to be happy. Well, maybe we don't. Maybe we don't want happiness as it's defined today, the smiley face, frothy happiness as virtually synonymous with pleasure. Maybe we want what the Greeks called eudaimonia, which sounds like something you should take an antibiotic for, but in fact is often translated as happiness, but wrongly so, because really it's more of a flourishing is a closer definition. And what are some of the elements of a flourishing life that are not necessarily a happy one? There's overlap, but not 100%. Well, there's kind of a selflessness, I think, to a flourishing life, right? There's a virtuousness to it. So Aristotle thought that virtue and happiness were linked. For Aristotle, there could be no such thing as a happy bank robber. He's not a virtuous person. He can't be happy. We think, yeah, he could rob banks and he could be happy as long as he doesn't get caught. No, this is happiness as virtue. And if you say you ask a working mother of 3, holding down 2 jobs, you ask her, are you happy? I mean, she's likely to look at you like, you're asking the wrong question. I'm needed. I don't know about happy. The philosopher Nietzsche said, start each day by asking yourself one question. Is there one person in this world I can bring some pleasure to today? It's a good question. Another element of the flourishing life, I think, is patience and attention. They're sort of connected with selflessness. Really, the ultimate gift you can give someone is your attention. When a child wants something from you, 9 times out of 10, they want your attention. And not this counterfeit attention, but the real thing. And kids can see right through fake attention if you're on your phone, if you're not fully present. So this patient attentiveness is really a kind of generosity. It's a generosity toward others, and it's a generous attitude toward time. If you're impatient, you're greedy. You're greedy for the future. You want it now. If you're patient, you have a more generous attitude toward time and toward yourself. People impatient with others are almost always impatient with themselves. I want to make sure I leave time for Q&A. So I'm just very briefly going to talk about another piece of this flourishing life, which is creativity. We heard the music playing. It was awesome. I think the band is happy. Is the band happy? Yes. there are a lot of myths surrounding creative people and geniuses, right? We think that they're born with these abilities. You know, Mozart just popped out of the womb, you know, composing and playing the piano. And he did start at a young age, but he also grew up in a very musical family in a very musical time. So we think geniuses are born, or we think that they're made through hard work, right? It's the 10,000-hour rule. You have to put in 10,000 hours to achieve results. I want to offer a third idea. Geniuses, creative people, are not born, they're not made, they're grown in the soil. You know, the soil matters. I think of an apple tree. If you want to grow an apple tree, you need the seed, that's the genetic material. You need the hard work, you have to water it. But it's not going to grow in cement. You need the right soil. So if you look at a map, say you have the happiness map over here and you have the genius map over here, same thing with the genius map. Unequal distribution, but over time, because it changes over time. Certain places at certain times produce buckets of brilliant ideas and brilliant minds. And it could be Florence during the Renaissance, Athens during its golden age, lesser known places like Edinburgh in the 18th century, Hangzhou, China in the 13th century, and even Calcutta, India in the late 19th, early 20th century. So in my book, Geography of Genius, I set off on another journey around the world and back in time trying to answer one simple question. What was in the water and can we bottle it? You know, what can we learn from these places? And just a few things. One is that they're almost all cities. I think I can say this in a college campus, but there is an expression that cities are where ideas go to have sex. There's something to be said for that. There's interaction, there's density, and you get new ideas coming out of that. There's also a lot of conversation, whether it's the symposia in Athens or the coffee shops of Vienna or the Snapchat conversations of today. What I like to say about the internet is that it's geography by other means, right? These cultures interacting online. Still, in my mind, a kind of geography. Another trait that all these creative places have, that all creative people have, and it's very simple, but true, openness to experience. Openness to experience. Are you open to the other? And I think this explains why so many geniuses have been immigrants. Einstein, Freud, Victor Hugo, Marie Curie. And people always wonder, like, and it continues to this day, you know, why is this connection between immigrants and genius? And one theory is the immigrants work really hard because they want to prove themselves. And okay, that might explain success, but not creative genius. I think it's because the immigrant brings that outsider's perspective that is so needed for creativity. So however you feel about the immigration debate going on in our country today, I can say without a doubt that immigration is good for creative genius, and that there is a kind of creativity contagion. You know, if you surround yourself with creative people, you're more likely to be creative. I like to think of it as like chopsticks. So just say you've lived in a town, you've never seen anyone eat with anything other than a fork and knife. And then along comes this Chinese family, and they're eating with chopsticks. And you're like, huh, that never occurred to me. Now, you're unlikely to pick up those chopsticks and start eating your food with chopsticks. But on some level, and I truly believe this, something's gone on in your mind where you thought, huh, if you can eat your food differently, maybe you can create art differently, or have conversations differently, or solve this problem differently. Once there's a break in your thinking, all kinds of possibilities are opened up. So really, people, I tend to steer away from like easy summations in my books. I'm a person that likes to dwell on the questions more than the answers. But people like answers, and I understand that. So at the end of Geography of Genius, I come up with the 3 Ds. Diversity, disorder, and diversity, discernment, and disorder. So diversity, and this is what all creative places have in common, means not just ethnic diversity, but intellectual diversity. People thinking differently. Discernment, you don't often think about this with creative people and places. You think they just have all these great ideas, and well, they do, but they have to discern. So Linus Pauling, brilliant man, 2-time Nobel Prize winner, was asked by a young student once, Dr. Pauling, how do you come up with so many good ideas? He said, it's easy. I come up with lots of ideas and I throw away the bad ones. You know, you need to do that. And so all these genius clusters, as I call them, are not only magnets for good ideas, they're colanders that sift out the good ones and the bad ones. Silicon Valley is very good at that. You go to Silicon Valley with your idea for the next app that's going to change the world and make you really rich, and within 10 seconds, they'll tell you whether it's good or bad. And disorder. We got two types of people, the messy desk people and the clean desk people. Clean desk people, raise your hands. Okay, messy desk people, raise your hands. All right. Studies show it's the messy desk people who are going to be more creative, that yeah. I'm just saying, and Einstein was a slob. I'm just saying. Lots of discussion about that. So a little bit of chaos is actually good in our lives. And it's, you know, there was a psychologist named Walter Freeman, a neurologist, and he hooked up a bunch of rabbits to electrodes to their brains and introduced the rabbits to odors. And some of the odors they recognized and some they didn't. And for the odors that were new to them, the brainwave was no longer a regular pattern, but a chaotic state. And Freeman calls this, and I think this is wonderful, the I don't know state. The I don't know state. And it's really important to enter that state, as uncomfortable as it makes you feel, as uncomfortable as professors may feel about it. If you're not entering the I don't know state on a regular basis, you're not doing your job. As a human being, I think. You don't want to stay in the I don't know state forever. You want to move on, but you want to come back to a new I don't know state. So got these two books, Geography of Bliss, Geography of Genius, Happy Places, Creative Places. Venn diagram. Is there any overlap? In other words, you know, what I had really thought was not much. You know, I thought if you're going to be an artist, you've got to suffer. The more you suffer, the more artistic you are. And then, to bring you back to Iceland, I was having coffee, drink lots of coffee in Iceland because of the darkness, with a man named Hilmar. And Hilmar is a composer of classical music. He was a mentor to Björk, the pop singer. Brilliant man. His music, though, is incredibly haunting, sad in that beautiful way, sublime. And I said, Hilmar, you know, I'm a little confused because he you know, produces this beautiful music. He's very creative, but he seemed happy, right? And this was confusing me. I mean, he really seemed happy. He was Icelandic. And I said, Hilmar, like, what's going on here? You seem happy, but you create this beautiful, sad music. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, yeah, overall, I am happy, but I cherish my melancholia. I cherish my melancholia. And I think that's hugely important, that in this rush for happiness, and as you read books about happiness, keep in mind, you don't want to push all the sadness out of your life. That there's a place for that, to cherish that melancholia, and to find an outlet for it, hopefully a creative outlet. So if you've been dozing off or checking your iPhone the whole time, you're in luck. You just need to pay attention now. Because now I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know in 10 words. Unfortunately, they're not my words. They're Plato's words. But you know, you don't want to show up Plato. That's bad form. So here's what he said. What is honored in a country will be cultivated there. What is honored in a country will be cultivated there. Again, simple, obvious, but true. And you can substitute country, you can swap it out with culture, what's honored in a culture. Corporation, what's honored in a corporation. I don't know, university, what's honored on a college campus will be cultivated there. We don't often think about what we honor. And today on Values Day, I would challenge you, when you leave here and you go to lunch and you go about your day, I challenge you to think about what it is that you honor. Not just with your words, not just with platitudes, but with your deeds, with your actions, with your thoughts. What do you really honor in life? And I think once you're clear on that, everything kind of clicks into place. It's almost something magical about what happens in your life. Things will happen for you. Things line up. It's a mysterious process, and it is, I think, pure genius. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for your attention. Thank you very much. And we have questions. Now, I was told that there would be questions, that this is an inquisitive bunch.
Hey, thanks so much for coming out and sharing with us today.
My pleasure.
Two interesting things I heard you kind of talking about in your talk. One, of course, was happiness. The second was truth. And I just wanted to know what was more important to you in your journey so far?
Hold on, bring the mic back. What do you mean by truth? Big question, right?
Interpret. Yeah, that's up to you. We can talk, but I just want to hear you.
I like what William James said about this. He said, truth is what works. He was a pragmatist, and so am I. And that's, I think, kind of the key. Truth is what works. That doesn't mean I can say, hey, 2 + 2 = 5. That works for me. No. But, let's say you wanted to get in shape, and you could study, like, the physics of exercise and the biology of exercise, or you could just exercise. Like, you don't need to know why exercise is good for you. You just need to do it. So, that's my approach, is that truth is what works. And it's that practicality of, these cultures, that's what they do. They don't know why they're happy necessarily. In fact, the countries where they are the happiest, they tend to think about happiness less and buy fewer books on happiness, although I hope they buy mine. But, it's just they do what works. So I would go with that answer. Others?
Thank you as well for that beautiful speech and all the information that you shared with us. Have you felt that your studies of happiness and as well as genius, have you felt that has changed? You said at the beginning that you're a grump. Do you think that has changed your perception of the world or how you feel your own happiness?
No, that's a good question. I'm not going to lie to you and say, I started out as a 5 and now I'm a 10 on the happiness scale. But I have bumped up to somewhere around a 6.5. Which is progress. I have to constantly remind myself of the lessons that I lay out in my book, especially the not overthinking things and that my pen lie idea from Thailand, little things that bubble up. And it's work to keep reminding myself of them. I would say I'm less unhappy, which is a way of saying happier. And I'm not good at taking my own advice, as a lot of people are. In terms of creativity, since there I'm really looking at places, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I realize that, while I cannot be like the Medici family in Florence, or, I don't have the power to control a whole city-state, but I have some input, not a lot, in my family, and I can set the tone of, creating a culture of creativity in the house. So she's got a very messy desk, and that's okay, little things like that. So it's a series of little things that I think have made me a little bit happier and a little bit more creative. Other questions? Yes?
Hey, Eric. Thank you for taking our questions.
Thanks for coming.
All right, so trust is a big variable that contributes to happiness.
Yes.
From your experiences, is that trust given, or is that trust given until someone breaks that trust and proves that they're not worthy of it, or is that trust earned?
I think it depends on the concentric circles, right? So trust of your immediate family is sort of the easiest to start with. You'll lend your brother or maybe even a cousin a few $100s that you wouldn't lend to a stranger. So you have at the center, you have trust of family, then you have friends, you have community, and then you have strangers. And in some countries, like say some Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, there's a huge amount of trust of the tribe. And there still are tribes, basically. But very little trust of the outsider. And so I think the trust of the in-group, the family, is given. And the trust of the outer groups is earned. And that's the hard kind of trust to have, that trust of the stranger, which is why that question I posed to you, overall most people can be trusted. It's not like overall my family can be trusted or my friends, it's most people. And that's the hard part. Thank you.
Hi, in one of your chapters you say that food is the mirror of a nation's soul, and I really loved that, but I wondered if you could talk more about your experience with that in different countries that you've been through. We have a food studies minor here, and I always think about food and its interaction with culture, but there to say that food is the mirror of a nation's soul, I just love that. I don't know if you can comment more about that.
Yeah, and it's not the food per se, but a culture's relationship to food. I mean, it's the one thing, we were talking about this over dinner last night, it's the one thing everyone has in common. We all eat and we all eat together, you know, and this is why you see compelling characters and unfortunately tragic characters like Anthony Bourdain and his travels, that he was using food as a window into the culture, and it's a marvelous window. The thing is, people eat a lot of weird food out there. So let me talk about that briefly. In Iceland, I eat harkel, which is rotten shark that's been fermenting in the ground for 6 months. And so I approach this with an open mind. Okay, maybe this is okay. You know, maybe I've been missing out on harkel, rotten shark all my life. And it's just awful. It's just absolutely, it's like, it took me like weeks to get the taste out of my mouth. I mean, I was using mouthwash, I'm serious. And so, and this kind of speaks to how I approach the world is, that's weird. That's weird that they eat rotten shark, and I don't shy away from calling it weird, but I don't judge it beyond the weirdness. And I always ask, but what do they get out of it? You know, in Thailand, they eat water bugs and cockroaches, fried bugs. Weird. To me, it's weird. I'm not going to pretend it's not weird, but what do they get out of it, and might there be something there for me? That's my approach to food and to other cultures. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you again for your talk. I was trying to imagine why we chose this book, and in your deliberations and in my reading, and then based on what you said today, it appears that higher education is screwed, right? You said that we shouldn't overthink things, that's what we do. And then you talked about what we value is where we put our resources, basically is my interpretation of the issue of country, culture, person, place, and value. So what do we do? Because by definition, we overthink things. I don't think it makes us any happier. If you think about higher ed as a place, it's not a very happy place. So what do we do?
You have to change. I mean, cultures can change. None of this is written in stone. The places of genius are fluid around the world. Happy places over centuries probably change too, if they could measure it. So it doesn't have to be. It's not a fait accompli that you have to say, because I'm getting a master's or Ph.D., I'm destined to be miserable. You know, that's not the case. It's how do you approach your work? Do you approach it with a sense of joy, and which a sense of curiosity, and even more than curiosity is wonder. Because I think that's what is, if I may, I think is unfortunately missing from a lot, not all, college campuses, is that sense of wonder. Right? Socrates said all philosophy, Plato said all philosophy begins with wonder. That's a big word, that sense of wonder. To behold something and to not just try to understand it and dissect it into smaller parts, but to sort of appreciate it. And that happens on college campuses. It definitely does, but it doesn't happen as often as it could, I think. And interdisciplinary approaches, which I imagine you have going on here in this campus are a great thing. Too often, though, departments are siloed off and they're not talking to one another. And in my book, Geography of Genius, is one thing I discovered is that almost all genius breakthroughs involve some degree of interdisciplinariness, different worlds colliding. So all of that can be changed, and I would like to think that the really knowledgeable, wise Ph.D. is happier than someone. In other words, if you can achieve both, I think you're better off. If you can achieve a great education and happiness and not lose that sense of wonder, I think that would be the best. It's not easy, though. It's not easy. That was a tough question. Anyone have a softball question? Oh, good. Easy question, please.
I just want you to comment on love. If you give love to people, you receive love, it certainly brings great joy to your life, but it also opens you up to the reality that you might lose somebody.
Right.
Maybe the closest person that I've lost, I lost my mom when she was 90. We were very, very close. A woman of font of unconditional love, and I grieved her very, very vividly for years. And I remember a pastor said in a sermon once, grief is the price we pay for love. So like you say, embracing that melancholy, if you love, you'll experience loss.
Right.
But there's deep joy in that because you loved.
That's a really good question. When I was in India, I met with a guru named Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and you're supposed to write in a question to him. There were 1,000 people in the audience. I wrote a question, is there anything greater than happiness? And he picked it out of the hat, the first one. I couldn't believe it. And he answered without hesitating. He said, yes, love. Love is greater than happiness. And that stuck with me. And that's why at the end of my talk I suggested that happiness may not be enough. Because I think love certainly fits into the flourishing life. And you are setting yourself up for pain. The Buddhists have the idea that you love someone fully, but you're not attached to the loving of them. And it's a very nuanced idea and very difficult, but I think there's something to that. Again, it's sort of what I alluded to earlier, that 100% into something, but you're not tied to the expectation. So if you love someone and you have an expectation they're going to be around forever, then yes, you've taken yourself out of the moment then. You're then projecting into the future. Loving in the present moment is actually not painful, right? It's later the loss or the fear of loss of a loved one. That's the painful part. If you stay present in the moment and attentive, the pain will come eventually, but it doesn't have to be part of love all the time. So yeah, I think the guru was right. I think you're right. I think there are things greater than happiness, and love would be one of them. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Weiner.
Yes, here you are.
I've been told I have the pleasure of asking you the last question.
Okay.
So you talked a lot about how culture and relationships impact happiness. But I was wondering if you have any thoughts from your travels on how societal structures, particularly government, impact people's happiness.
Huh. Not as much as you'd think, I think, is my gut reaction. How do governments affect our happiness? I don't think there are countries in the world people are happy because of the government. They can be unhappy because of the government if it's a tyrannical government, definitely. But I think governments can kind of get out of the way, and they can, like in Bhutan, this policy of gross national happiness, they get a lot of grief for this because people say, well, you should all be happy now. And they're not all happy. And they never said they were going to be happy. They're merely changing the goalpost a little bit. They're saying, let's aim for something different. So that's how I think government can be helpful, in sort of tweaking and saying, let's aim over here for something called happiness as opposed to money. But it's not imposing it. Government cannot impose happiness. And you know, famously, and I can end with this, Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, someone famously complained to Ben Franklin later, said, where's my happiness, damn it? And Franklin said, we said nothing about giving it to you, just the right to pursue it. You got to go out and get it yourself. So on that note, pursue it, go out and get it yourself, but do it with a light touch, and have an excellent Values Day.